Meyer. I'm the executive director of the Ruskin Art Club, the sponsor of these two study sessions on Ruskin's essay, The Mystery of Life and Its Arts, the final essay in Sesame and Lilies. Interestingly, uh, the first edition of Sesame and Lilies did not have this essay. Then Ruskin added it some years later, and then in the in an even later edition of Sesame and Lilies, he withdrew it again. So it's a kind of homeless essay in a way in Ruskin's works, but a very important one. We are honored to have Rachel Dickinson again with us, current master of the Guild of St. George, charity founded by Ruskin in 1871, to lead us in our these Saturday study sessions. Rachel teaches interdisciplinary studies and English at Manchester Metropolitan University in the UK, specializing in 19th century literature and culture with a particular focus on John Ruskin and textiles. This is the second of these two sessions, and Rachel will start by getting us a little oriented before we proceed to work through the second half of the essay.
Good. Thank you, Gabriel, and hello, everyone. I'm going to quickly share screen and just do a little bit of a recap from last week, as well as sort of introducing a few things we skipped over last time and a couple of additional little bits and pieces. So last week, we were primarily thinking about the context of his public lectures. I'm not going to talk about that today. His himself as a lecturer and a little bit of mystery of arts as a lecturer. And the key reference I referred you to last week was Dinah Birch's 2015 piece in the Cambridge Companion to John Ruskin. If you want to know about Ruskin and lecturing, that's your real starting point for thinking about that a bit more. And so this week we're going to be doing a little bit of a recap of those. I've pulled out a couple of similar passages from Ruskin to again give that sense of how what he's dealing with here is permeated throughout all of his work. And then a little bit about some of the key passages we skipped last time. And so we thought last week about how he was pulling us in, about the somewhat despairing, actually, in places, autobiographical approach he was taking, the way he begins to enumerate what he's calling the great mysteries of life, and the four classes or types of people that he sets out for us. And we'll pick up on that again before I finish these slides. And it was a much more negative feeling piece than some of Ruskin's writing, and a bit dispiriting even as one works one's way through that. It's part of a sort of rhetorical arc that he's working his way through over the course of this lecture. And so we've left it at a fairly negative point. It is then going to begin to rise up again, becoming more positive as he progresses, and ends with a clear message of hope by the time we finish today's reading. I mentioned last week just a few of the political contexts that were going on, and a lot of that around the notion of conflict between the British and the Irish at this particular point in time, as well as reminders about the British as a colonial people and an empire, and just thinking about how that is permeating some of what we then look at in this week's section as well. And I'm going over that very quickly, but we did look at it in more depth last week. This, Gabriel, has just run through for us the sort of history of Ruskin's setting out of this material for the public. And the fact that he did, as Gabriel has mentioned, remove mystery from it when he republished it in 1882, because a friend had said it was really too depressing and negative. At least that was part of the rationale for removing it. This was one of the quotations from last week, really just giving a sense about the sheer number of people who were coming to Ruskin's lectures and came to this one. About 2,000 people attended this lecture when it was first given. And this is the venue that he gave it in, the concert hall at the Dublin International Exhibition. This was a little quotation that I put up last time around Ruskin becoming actively political through the act of giving his lectures in the 1850s. And there was a question about this little image, and I promised to find my copy of it, which I have pulled out. And I've just very briefly photographed a few of the pages. It is very much designed as sort of something to be sitting in smoking rooms for people to pick up and flip through and improve themselves by reading of Ruskin. There was one about Carlyle and other topics as well. And it just basically gives sort of introductions to Ruskin and then largely quotes Ruskin and weaves together a sense of some of his key ideas. It does have a bibliography for what they call the studious smokers, and those who are interested are told to get in contact with George Allen, as would be the case at this point in the publishing history of Ruskin. And I've photographed these two pages of the section called His Impeachment of Modern Society, because I think that does very much resonate with much of what we're looking at in this week's readings. And the notion that within the wider public of Britain, Ruskin was seen as somebody who was impeaching modern society and pointing out what was wrong. And if I read just briefly one of these, oops, I've changed pages. I didn't mean to. I'm trying to move the thing so I can read it. We'll see things like we indeed were not late till lately a loquacious people, nor a useless one, but the Romans did more and said less than any other nation that ever lived, and their language is the most heroic ever spoken by men. Or further down, at present wise men for the most part are silent, and good men powerless. The senseless vociferate, and the heartless govern, and so on. And so quotations like that were sitting there for smokers to read in their smoking rooms. And I've also pulled out a few thoughts from Ruskin that are echoing what we're seeing today. A reminder of the notion of ilth and wealth that he articulates. And if you want to read more about those, take a peek at Unto This Last and Monera Pulveris. And the notion of ilth being that which leads away from life, what is unvaluable and what is malignant. And of course, the famous statement from Unto This Last that there is no wealth but life. And the fact that he then develops that to the notion of being helpful, that the richest person is the one who has always the widest helpful influence for the lives of others. We're going to see that thread running through what we're looking at today as well. And then, of course, what is probably one of my very favorite passages from Ruskin, the very beginning of Forest Claviger'a, where he launches the Guild of St. George and does it on the basis of, society is not well off now, despite what is being said around us at the time. And with much poverty, how can we be talking about our nation as being great? And then he says, for my own part, I will put up with this state of things passively, not an hour longer. And with that, launches the Guild of St. George to try to make a difference. Again, all of those concepts are running through what we're reading this week. And indeed, the challenge that it's not what things are, but what we wish to make them that we need to be thinking about. And finally, I've put in just a brief quotation from Morris, talking about the nature of Gothic, that central chapter in The Stones of Venice, but talking about the fact that, of course, Ruskin launched what Morris saw as being a new birth of society, without which genuine art, the expression of man's pleasure in his handiwork, must inevitably cease altogether, and with it the hopes of the happiness of mankind. And we'll see today's reading sort of culminates in a sense of the importance of art and joy in art. Just a couple of passages that we skipped last week that I think we need to have sitting beneath us in order to launch into this week's readings. 119 was sort of bringing us to a close, and I think we sort of ended with 120-ish. And in it, he sets out the types of people who we can turn to for examples uh, of ways of living. And so he sets out the wise religious men, the wise worldly men, the wise contemplative men, and then turns to another group. And those are the ones who are doing things that are useful. That's not working. Take that one. I'm then jumping to 127, where he sets out the importance of the types of people that are doing good things. And there's a really interesting tension here, and we might come back to this if we have time, where he's saying that the most beautiful art comes from those who feel themselves wrong, and yet because of that wrong feeling, they're also therefore doing right. And I think there's something really interesting here. I'd love for us to come back and talk about it, but I'm going to leave that just hanging. The notion of the arts and the labors of life that are being fulfilled in the spirit of striving against misrule. And so, again, fighting against what is wrong. And then finally in 129, where he says that these are the two great and constant lessons which our laborers teach us of the mystery of life. So we've just covered those, but there's one other, and a sadder one which they cannot teach us, which we must read on their tombstones. Do it with thy might. And he talks briefly about how people have tried and sort of missed the mark on this. And then he begins to work through the three areas by which we can think about achievements. And that's agriculture, which is what he deals with in 129. He's then going to turn to weaving and building, and we're going to read those together. And then by 135, he's dealing with those three terms again, but in a more active sense. And we'll see that when we get to it. And you'll see those notes off to the side of this screen. And so with that, let's pick up at section 130. I'm going to stop sharing screen. If I can find, there we go. So shall we do as we did last week? And I'll do call outs for volunteers of who is willing and able to read. And do I have any volunteers for weaving? Laurence, I see you on the chat, and textiles is certainly relevant if you're willing and able to read. So, Laurence, might you be willing to read?
Good evening, everyone. Yes, of course, Rachel. Hello, everyone. Where shall I start?
So, if you start at the beginning of section 130,
Okay, perfect.
and then just read through 130. Sorry.
Okay, perfect. It's as you can tell, it's my first. I did listen to last week's. I had a catch-up session. Okay. Then after agriculture, the art of kings, take the next head of human arts, weaving. The art of queens, honored of all noble heathen women, in the person of their virgin goddess, honored of all Hebrew women by the word of their wisest king. She lays her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. She stretches out her hand to the poor. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She maketh herself covering of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. She maketh fine linen, and selleth it, and delivereth girdles to the merchant. Okay. What have we done in all these thousands of years with this bright art of Greek maid and Christian matron? 6,000 years of weaving, and have we learned to weave? Might not every naked wall have been purple with tapestry, and every feeble breast fenced with sweet colours from the cold? What have we done? Our fingers are too few, it seems, to twist together some poor covering for our bodies. We set our streams to work for us, and shook the air with fire, to turn our spinning wheels, and are we yet clothed? Are not the streets of the capitals of Europe foul with we sail of cast clouds and rotten rags. Is not the beauty of your sweet children left in wretchedness of disgrace, while with better honour nature closes the brood of the bird in its nest, and the suckling of the wolf in her den? And does not every winter's snow robe what you have not robed, and shroud what you have not shrouded? And every winter's wind bear up to heaven its wasted souls, to witness against you hereafter by the voice of their Christ, I was naked, and ye clothed me not.
Lovely. Thank you, Laurence.
You're
And I
welcome.
asked for Laurence to read because she's done research on Ruskin and textiles as well. So what do we make of this? What's interesting?
Well, I guess I'll point out his use of references to the nature and the environment, that pointing the direction for how we ourselves should behave, and that naturally these things occur. And there's something about us that has taken us out of that. But he's always pointing us back to, in this case anyway, the natural world as a guide for how we should use our labor.
Good. Janet, I thought I saw Janet had raised her hand. Yes.
Yes, I was going to say the same thing. And yet before that, he has the contrast as well about we set our streams to work for us and choke the air with fire. And I think that's just the contrast, like we're abusing what's natural. And yet nature holds all this beauty for us.
Yes, this week I was teaching the storm cloud of the 19th century to my students, and we had a performance by Tom Paine in the evening of his sort of performance of storm cloud, and those wonderful echoes around the sort of effects of pollution happening, and just woven in gently here, but that sense of how climate change was real. Gabriel.
Yeah, also I think in the social context of the time, we have this reference to the industrialization of textile making with its environmental effects, but then you also have that other aspect of the situation that Ruskin sees so clearly, namely the disempowerment of all the, especially the older women and the widows who once made textiles by hand, and of course, as you know, his efforts with many others to create niche markets for those textiles and to encourage weaving, in that traditional sense. But the contrast and the conflict between industrial textile making and the handcraft that was being lost.
Continuing on the societal axis, I think he's saying too that the disparity of wealth, the inability to clothe the poor, is a significant aspect of our failure. What have we done? Our fingers are too few. Might not every naked wall have been purple with tapestry, and every feeble breast fenced with sweet colors from the cold? And then he contrasted with what nature quite naturally, quite automatically does, the wolf in its den and so on. Even the snow coats the land, covers the land. I think that it's an extraordinary, prescient understanding of the disparity of capital, the disparities that emerge from capitalism.
Bernard, you look like you'd like to speak too, and then Laurence.
Yes, I think it all also has something to do with what Ruskin dealt with in the initial section when he was dealing with agriculture. That too few people were on the land, too few people were producing food, just as too few people were doing the work with spinning and weaving. And as a result, our poverty is in the fact that there were too few people that fed the hungry, and too few people that clothed the naked.
Yeah. And Laurence?
Yes, well, I just wanted to point out the kind of rhetoric, which I think is amazing in this passage. And also the idea of, we've changed perhaps our relationship to nature. As someone said, it's also about the environment and how we use, and this is the personal pronoun, we use, streams and so on. So basically we're inverting what should be the natural world we should be immersed in our environment and not using our environment to our own end. And so there's a lot of meaning, and it strikes me that it's such a contemporary. We could still say that today. We've lost that, as well as, of course, the craft and the knowledge and this relationship with the nest and the bird and so on, the natural world. I find that extremely powerful. Of course, you have to say, Rachel, that I remember you gave a paper on weaving as well, and the context, and I think this text is just so powerful, even in the way it's written, including the we, because of course he's including himself and not really pointing to just criticizing others, and I think that's also why we feel we are just as guilty as anyone reading that.
Gabriel.
Yep. And also that, just to underline it, that wonderful anomaly that we industrialize so as to produce more textiles, and yet not more are clothed. So that whole notion that we've industrialized in order to increase the supply of clothing, but in fact it doesn't translate into a more universal clothing of the poor and of the population. That he wants us to notice that anomaly.
And the way we're all complicit in ilth. So leading to wastefulness, we're all complicit in it. I saw another hand go up, but I didn't quite catch you. Tyson.
Oh, I think he's saying that our priorities are completely screwed up.
Yeah.
I mean, in essence, he's saying we're doing this, but we should be doing that.
Yeah. Eric.
I guess I'm wondering how we interpret this passage today, now that most people have some kind of clothing, industrially produced clothing. So do you think this problem has been solved?
No, not at all. What I am hopeful about is that there does seem to be a growing movement amongst the younger people, and I'm sort of saying those who are sort of about 30 and under, where reselling clothing, vintage clothing, has actually become much more fashionable than it was, say, a decade ago, or in the decades preceding that. And so the idea of not wasting clothing. I was listening to a radio report recently about the number of younger people who are buying quite expensive clothing, hoping it will either last them for years and years, or planning to resell it, and not buying fast fashion. And if the youth are turning away from fast fashion, maybe we're getting somewhere finally, but it's been a long road from, let's say, about the 1950s to now, of sort of beginning to turn back that clock. So I have hope, but
it's somewhat metaphorical as well, and analogous to other kinds of losses, lacks, and things that are missing from the general condition of our humanity.
Yeah. Before we move to the next section, I also just wanted to note that he's beginning to make rhetorical use of biblical quotations even more strongly as we work our way through these next passages. We're quite often going to see these as sort of concluding statements from him along the way. So as I look around the room, is there anybody who works in building or architecture, or has a particular interest in those fields, and would like to read our next section for us? Eric. So can you take us off with 131, please?
Lastly, take the art of building, the strongest, proudest, most orderly, most enduring of the arts of man, that of which the produce is in the surest manner accumulative, and need not perish or be replaced. But if once well done, will stand more strongly than the unbalanced rocks, more prevalently than the crumbling hills. The art which is associated with all civic pride and sacred principle, with which men record their power, satisfy their enthusiasm, make sure their defense, define and make dear their habitation. And in 6,000 years of building, what have we done? Of the greater part of all that skill and strength, no vestige is left but fallen stones that encumber the fields and impede the streams. But from this waste of disorder and of time and of rage, what is left to us, constructive and progressive creatures that we are, with ruling brains and forming hands, capable of fellowship and thirsting for fame, can we not contend in comfort with the insects of the forest, or in achievement with the worm of the sea? The white surf rages in vain against the ramparts built by poor atoms of scarcely nascent life. But only ridges of formless ruin mark the places where we once dwelt our noblest multitudes. The ant and the moth have cells for each of their young, but our little ones lie in festering heaps, in homes that consume them like graves, and night by night, from the corners of our streets, rise up the cry of the homeless, I was a stranger, and ye took me not in.
Good. Thank you.
Wow.
So who wants to start us off on this one?
It kind of reminds me of a passage from the Bible.
Yeah.
My favorite passage. The foxes all have holes, the birds all have nests, but the Son of Man does not have a place to rest. Something like that. That's
Yeah.
paraphrasing, but I think he's doing some biblical stuff again.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Stuart was first and then Gabriel.
Oh, I thought you wanted someone to read the next. So sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Gabriel. Stuart, I'll get you for the next one then.
No,
Okay.
just a note that these passages are all from Matthew 25, which of course is the scene of the Last Judgment. So one by one, these are statements of the basis of happiness or perdition. So it's quite striking that they're not just sentiments, but they're part of this drama of the judgment of humans and human life.
Yeah, good. And in fact, by the time we get to 134, he's saying judgment is now. So again, that rhetorical building that he's doing for us is sort of progressing through here. Tyson, did you have your hand up? Yep.
I did, yes. So I'm really sorry I missed last weekend. I was at a wedding, but at the very beginning of last week's, he talks about how he's not supposed to talk about religious things, but then promptly this whole thing is he's got religious allusions sprinkled all throughout. Did you guys unpack some of that? Why he went that route?
We didn't do a lot on that, but I can tell you a few of my thoughts on why he's done it. Partly it's Ruskin, the what's the word I'm looking for? Causing a little bit of a rupture, very consciously going against what he's been told to do in order to have effect. So there's a rhetorical element to it.
Yeah.
And I think for Ruskin at this point in time, you cannot divorce the religious from all of these other issues. And so it has to be there, regardless of whether the institution has said that he can or cannot talk about religion.
I thought that was hilarious. I was reading it all throughout, just going, "Oh my God, this is such a finger in the eye to don't talk about the religion."
No, and he does that so many times when he's invited to give lectures. So the Bradford lecture,
Right.
where he's invited to talk about art, and I think the people who had just built their lovely building were hoping that he was going to say how wonderful it was, and he basically tells them off for being bad industrialists and so on. So. Yeah, beware of inviting Ruskin to give a lecture. Janet.
I kind of love that because I'm from Southern California. Hello, all you wonderful folks from the UK. And we are having a homeless problem, and the current developers are building housing for people that can have upper incomes, and there's actually available housing for very expensive housing, but there is the lack of housing for affordable housing. And I just read all of that into this because none of that will be permanent, obviously, over time and over the ages. I just find him always so ever present. I always am so drawn to Ruskin because of how much I can relate to Ruskin. And in this passage, I was a plumbing contractor before I retired. And so I really cared about people being able to maintain their homes and be satisfied with their homes was my big focus that, if something's bothering you, maybe we can fix it so that you'd be more enjoyable of your home. And I just am amazed by the fact that we have all these strangers that we are not able to take in because of, I think, the greed of the industry.
Yeah.
And I hate to say that since I feel like I was somehow part of it and couldn't help it.
And again, that's right back to the Ruskinian sense of ill. And, the property industry is a sort of cesspool of ill from a Ruskinian perspective. Eric.
I guess he's also making the same argument that he did with the clothing. Kind of wondering why we're not accumulating things over all these years of civilization. It's kind of like sadness that we're not being able to accumulate over time. I guess with the clothing one, I was more skeptical because clothing does rot. We can't really accumulate multiple purple tapestries over thousands of years. It's going to rot. But for building, I do agree with him. Why are we not, why are we tearing down old stuff and then rebuilding worse stuff? I think that's kind of what he's getting at. Maybe someone would disagree with me.
Yeah.
I want to add on to that where like with architecture, there are some movements that want to build lasting architecture, and then there's some movements that are very like style oriented, right? We like build up buildings for a particular style and tear down buildings that no longer match this era of style that we're in and that we want to be in. And it's incredibly wasteful, right? Where like we keep creating these new innovating things or innovating styles and like burying our old styles, and it's like maybe part of that reason or something that Ruskin is kind of referencing where we're not like upholding that history and we're not able to keep these buildings.
Yeah. And again, those are things that are just woven throughout Ruskin's works. So, shall we move on to the next section then? And Stuart, had you volunteered to do the next one? Was that right?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Ruskin is always lamenting. I mean, this is the voice in the wilderness and Job, and he's always lamenting. He's so appropriately lamenting. We now have a president who is the epitome of everything Ruskin was against here in this country, sadly, tragically. Must it always be thus? Is our life forever to be without profit, without possession? Shall the strength of its generations be as barren as death? Or cast away their labor as the wild fig tree casts her untimely figs? Is it all a dream then, the desire of the eyes and the pride of life? Or if it be, might we not live in nobler dream than this? The poets and prophets, the wise men and the scribes, though they have told us nothing about a life to come, have told us much about the life that is now. They have had, they also, their dreams, and we have laughed at them. They have dreamed of mercy and of justice. They have dreamed of peace and goodwill. They have dreamed of labor undisappointed and of rest undisturbed. They have dreamed of fullness in harvest and overflowing in store. They have dreamed of wisdom in counsel and of providence in law, of gladness of parents and strength of children, and glory of gray hairs. And at these visions of theirs, we have mocked and held them for idle and vain, unreal and unaccomplishable. What have we accomplished with our realities? Is this what has come of our worldly wisdom, tried against their folly? This, our mightiest possible, against their impotent ideal? Or have we only wandered among the specters of a baser felicity and chased phantoms of the tombs instead of visions of the Almighty, and walked after the imaginations of our evil hearts instead of after the counsels of eternity, until our lives, not in the likeness of the cloud of heaven, but of the smoke of hell, have become as a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. Well, indeed, we sort of have, and we will continue to. My view, and I'll just get on my soapbox for a moment, is that the evolution of our species is at fault. Not right, left, so-called right, left, not black, white, not north, south, not rich, poor, but rather the evolution of consciousness. We don't have a sufficient number, an actual critical mass of individuals who are smart, who are intelligent, who are educated, and, to follow Ruskin, profoundly compassionate. We simply do not have a sufficient number. We're outnumbered, let's put it that way. And it's evolution.
And it is interesting as you see various votes happening globally, and
Yep.
you watch and see what the educated people vote for and what the uneducated people vote for, and you realize that something in the communication and education just isn't getting through.
Oh, dark times. The Hindus have divided our lives into our humanity, or our experience of life itself, into yugas, into epochs. And we are in what they are calling Kali Yuga, the epoch of destruction, from which a phoenix will rise, presumably.
But we need to go through the fire first.
Oh, we do, and we are.
Yeah. Gabriel.
Yeah, just to note there's that wonderful sense here about the prophets preaching the unaccomplishable, the unaccomplishable ideal. Is a wonderful thing late in Ruskin, related by Cook in his book on studies in Ruskin, where at the very end of this, when Ruskin was Slade, professor of fine arts at Oxford in 1884, at the end of that whole period, he laments to his students that he's been preaching to them for many years now, and none of them have adopted the way of life that he's laid out for them. And he talks about them being a kind of ultimate consumerist persons, a calamity to the universe, as he calls it. And then there's this marvelous line where he says, people tell him, Ruskin, that what he's proposing, what he's preaching, is impractical, is impossible. And he's a marvelous line. He says, all this is called impossible. It may be so. I have nothing to do with its possibility, but only with its indispensability.
Yeah.
This is such a great line. The fact that it's, quote, impossible doesn't mean that it's not indispensable and absolutely necessary if we are to live and
so compressed.
One of my favorite examples of people trying to do Ruskin things was the Langdale linen industry and this little book they put together, Songs of the Spindle. And in the introduction to it, it talks about, people saying Ruskin's work is impossible, and the fact that they were quite consciously trying to do the impossible that Ruskin had asked them to do. So any other thoughts on that section? If not, we can move on to the next, because it's going to be building anyway. I did hear a slight voice coming in, though.
Yes, please. Can I say something?
Yeah, Claudia.
What I understood is that the need for utopias, he's saying that they need to become realities.
For sure.
Yeah. And the calling on us to do it. Janet.
I just love the line of walking.
Oh, we've lost. You've muted somehow.
I just love the line of walking the imagination of our evil heart. And the way I've always put that is basically in the framework of my Daffy Duck. I become I think of something and I relate it to the cartoon character who is basically the imagination of my evil heart, and usually the greedy side or the side that is not appropriate. And I guess I put it in a cartoonish frame of mind, but actually it's the imagination of my evil heart. And I just think that line is spectacular.
Yeah. Yeah, the rhetoric of the lines as they build. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going because I'm afraid we're going to run out of time again this week. So we're up to 133, where I think we've got a bit of a pivot beginning for us. So who wants to take us on a slightly different course?
I'd be happy to read this.
Oh, okay. Who said that?
Unless
Zach?
you have someone else
Yeah.
who's jumping.
Go ahead, Zach, and then Bernard, we'll get you for the next one.
Okay.
Does it vanish then? Are you sure of that? Sure that the nothingness of the grave will be a rest from this troubled nothingness, and that the coiling shadow which disquiets itself in vain cannot change into the smoke of the torment that ascends forever? Will any answer that they are sure of it, and that there is no fear, nor hope, nor desire, nor labor whither they go? Be it so. Will you not then make as sure of the life that now is as you are of the death that is to come? Your hearts are wholly in this world. Will you not give them to it wisely as well as perfectly? And see, first of all, that you have hearts, and sound hearts too, to give. Because you have no heaven to look for, is that any reason that you should remain ignorant of this wonderful and infinite earth, which is firmly and instantly given you in possession? Although your days are numbered and the following darkness sure, it is necessary that you should share the degradation of the brute because you are condemned to its mortality, or live the life of the moth and of the worm because you are to companion them in the dust. Not so. We may have but a few thousands of days to spend, perhaps hundreds only, perhaps tens. Nay, the longest of our time and best looked back on will be but as a moment, as the twinkling of an eye. Still we are men, not insects. We are living spirits, not passing clouds. He maketh the winds his messengers, the momentary fire his minister, and shall do less and shall we do less than these? Let us do the work of men while we bear the form of them. And as we snatch our narrow portion of time out of eternity, snatch also our narrow inheritance of passion out of immortality. Even though our lives be as a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away.
Thank you. So, what do we think of this one?
Hopeful.
Yeah.
You
Janet.
know, and for me, this places our work very much in the world. You know, I think about a lot about Ruskin's unconversion, his own religious development and sort of secular moralism, if you will, as he advances in his work. And I find the line here, where is it here? Although your days are numbered and the following darkness sure. This is a man who's not talking about an afterlife. This is a man who's talking very much about the only thing you know for certain. And he talks about this at the beginning, as well as in the intro to Crown of Wild Olive, that the only thing you can be certain of is the now. And he's really beginning to place in his own sort of development of ideas, judging your life not on some hoped for or imagined afterlife, but recognizing what is here in front of you. And just to close your comment about the impossible that some people worry about when they think about Ruskin, I don't think Ruskin worried about the feasibility of what's to be done in the world. I think when we feel things are impossible from his perspective, we've put our own limits on ourselves. And I think what Ruskin is always challenging us to do is to see what can actually be done and what can then come from it.
Yeah. Very much so. So Janet was first, then Gabriel.
Thanks. Yes, I think he kind of covers all the spiritual and religious all into one, because he makes a case that, yeah, there could be something in the afterlife and you're striving for that, but if there isn't, then what about the now? And I think he kind of makes sure that all bases are covered in this, and quite eloquently.
Yeah. And Gabriel?
Yeah, I think that that's his point. Even if there is an afterlife, you're living here now, and you have a task to do and to invest yourself. There's a what that Zach referred to the introduction to the Crown of Wild Olive, and I can't resist quoting the end of that, which amplifies this point. Free-heartedness and graciousness and undisturbed trust and requited love and the sight of the peace of others and the ministry to their pain, these and the blue sky above you and the sweet waters and flowers of the earth beneath, and mysteries and presences innumerable of living things, may yet be here your riches, untormenting and divine, serviceable for the life that now is, nor it may be without promise of that which is to come.
Incredible.
Yeah. And it is interesting how he sort of layers in, talk after talk, lecture after lecture, writing after writing, the layering of the ideas that intertwine. Stuart.
Well, just there's a man named Sadh Guru, S-A-D-H, with an enormous following. Whom I follow a bit. He's quite funny and quite brilliant. And he says, if you wake up in the morning, realize that 250,000 people around the planet will not wake up. They will be dead. And when you wake up with a smile and with a commitment to live this life. He's very much a Ruskinian. I don't know if he's read him. I have no idea, but he does come to California once in a while, rides a motorcycle, and fascinating character. I recommend him to everybody. He's extraordinary. It's S-A-D-H, Guru, G-U-R-U. Very Ruskinian.
Thanks.
Yep.
I have cats doing battle behind me. If you hear noises, they're playing, but they play fight after they eat. So
I feel that. Yes, I've got a similar problem.
yeah, exactly.
Rachel, I just wanted to say that I feel like Ruskin here is, I know he's sprinkling this lecture all throughout with biblical phrases, aphorisms, and so forth from, I'm assuming, the King James Bible. But he, even in the sections that he is not directly quoting from the Bible, it seems like he's channeling the folks who compiled it, because his language just seems so it seems so biblical in nature. I mean, to say something like "your days are numbered and the following darkness sure," that almost feels like something from Revelations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And of course, with Ruskin, the cadences of the Bible were just set into his brain from the very young age, when his family would just read through the Bible from beginning to end. And as soon as they finished it, start the reading again. And so as a child learning it, it was just infused into him, even if he's not always definitely sort of quoting from it. Before we move on, I just also want to draw our attention to the statement that let us do the work of men while we bear the form of them, which is beginning to emerge here. And we're going to see that picking up as we go through the next sections as well. Eric, you put a hand up, I think. Did you?
Yeah, but you basically addressed what I was about to
Okay,
say.
good.
I don't think it's some live in the moment kind of thing. I think he's also like he's appealing to, maybe we can also build something that would last past our life.
Yeah, good.
Can I say something?
Yes, Claudio.
Uh, uh, when he uh, well,
So you're breaking up quite a bit.
I think he's saying that paradise.
Your
And
mic
that,
is compromised, Claudia. Your mic is compromised. Try again.
oh, let me see.
Or tap it in the chat if that fails.
Okay, I'm
There you
putting
go.
it in the
Try
chat.
once
Now
more.
it's okay.
Then
You were talking into your shirt.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, good.
Yes. What I think is that what he means is that paradise can be here in earth, and for me, that's a contradiction with his Protestant way of the way the Protestants thought.
Somebody's already mentioned his unconversion. I
Yeah,
forget who
right.
did.
That's right.
And I think that was part of his unconversion was the realization that the very strict evangelical Protestant worldview that he had held could
Okay.
not be reconciled with where his ideas were going. And so he goes through the unconversion, but then he goes through a kind of reconversion.
Uh-huh. Okay, thank you.
One
Do it.
thought.
And then Gabriel.
Yeah, Sadhguru says, if heaven is so great, why don't you go now?
Gabriel?
Yeah, I think what fuels that unconversion, there were many issues. It was long coming, but I think the experience in Turin of attending the Waldensian church and having the preacher basically simply disparage life in this world. It's just a trial that you go, a meaningless trial that you go through in order to get somewhere else. And I think when Ruskin says he left the church and found himself before a canvas of Veronese, full of life and color and wine and and engagement, and realized that this had become his own focus on the beauty of this world, and not simply on a disparaging of this existence in favor of another one.
A construct at that.
Yeah.
So I'm conscious that we are more than halfway through our time and we are not yet halfway through our reading. If we're now, yeah, we've been going almost an hour, haven't we? So let's do the next section and then we might rethink whether we do everything going forward, but I think we need to do the next one. And Bernard, it was you who was up next, isn't it?
Yes, you were talking about paragraph 134.
134, yeah.
Yes, all right. And you want me to do the whole paragraph?
Yes, please.
All right. But there are some of you who believe not this, who think this cloud of life has no such close, that it is to float, revealed and illumined, upon the floor of heaven, in the day when he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him. Some day, you believe, within these 5 or 10 or 20 years, for every one of us the judgment will be set, and the books opened. If that be true, far more than this must be true. Is there but one day of judgment? Why, for us every day is a day of judgment. Every day is a dies irae, and writes its irrevocable verdict in the flame of its west. Think you that judgment waits till the doors of the grave are opened? It waits at the doors of your houses. It waits at the corners of your streets. We are in the midst of judgment. The insects that we crush are our judges. The moments we fret away are our judges. The elements that feed us judge as they minister, and the pleasures that deceive us judge as they indulge. Let us for our lives do the work of men while we bear the form of them, if indeed those lives are not as a vapor and do not vanish away.
Thank you.
Gorgeous. The
How are we
poetic
feeling?
repetition. Wonderful.
Exactly.
The poetic repetition.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Because we were feeling, last week more so even, there was sort of the heaviness that was coming down on us. And we're beginning, I think, to get the sense of, although judgment's being discussed, which should feel negative, in fact, there's a hope coming through. Tyson has put something in the chat as well. Tyson, did you want to comment?
No, that's okay. Just an observation.
Through the comment, yeah. Anybody else on this section?
Well, only that he is speaking of judgment as something that is approaching, or that is already here, that it's not pie in the sky or hellfire coming down, but our very acts judge us. If we don't feed the hungry, if we don't clothe the naked, if we don't house the homeless, what is to be our fate?
Janet, did you want to pick up?
Yeah, it's not like the Christmas story by about Ebenezer Scrooge. There's no scorebook that you have at the end. It's every day you have a chance, so you can right the ship in the midst of your life if you find that you're crushing too many insects.
I think that's really interesting, the comment about the crushing of the insects. Oh, Lenos, did you want to comment on that, or?
No, I think again, I'm struck by the combination of his interest in natural science, as we know, and every pebble has dignity in terms of should be noted, and yeah, I think in terms of scale, I think it's really this kind of you have the sense of the judgment day that is actually every day, and judgment is not a capital J, but in a way it's trivial, it's banal, but it's your chance every day, as if you were again just you are able to renew it also every day by every small gesture that counts. And I think that is also why it's so applicable I think as a it's less impressive than some passages where you think Judgment Day and in terms of parable, I think it's something that everybody can apply. Don't think about the abstract, just think about your neighbor, think about the fly coming in. I think it's remarkable.
And Stuart was next, and then Eric.
Yes, I'm beginning to feel that the word judgment can be a synonym for the word consciousness in Ruskin. First of all, you were getting there exactly, Janet, the same as I was getting there. And also did I just lose it? Yeah, I lost what the next stop was. Never mind. It's okay.
Eric, did you want to?
I guess maybe I think he's being more harsh than we might be presenting now. Like, I don't know if it's a chance. I think you are going to be judged regardless. And Rachel, you mentioned the bugs being crushed. I mean, they're going to judge you regardless of. I just think that he's being more like Old Testament-y here. Like he's not saying we have a choice in whether or not we do good. We have to do good because we are constantly being judged. But maybe people disagree with me.
Claudio.
I think he's talking about politics. It came to me the thought that the means justify the ends. He's saying that the means are the ends.
Yeah. In fact, that begins to take us to the next section.
Excuse me just a moment, sorry.
Yep. And what I might do is, although I think the next section is very important, I might just quickly read a few small segments from it because we are running out of time on ourselves here. So I'm going to pick up at the very beginning, and then I'm going to drop in and out a couple of times along the way of it. So the work of men. And what is that? Well, we may, any of us, know very quickly, on the condition of being wholly ready to do it. But many of us are, for the most part, thinking not of what we are to do, but of what we are to get. And then I'm going to jump down to the bottom of that paragraph, But station in life, how many of us are ready to quit that? Is it not always the great objection, where there is a question of finding something useful to do, well, we cannot leave our stations in life? And then I'm jumping further down where he runs through Levi, Peter, Paul, and their important stations, which they all left at brief notice. And then says, and whatever our station in life may be, at this crisis, those of us who mean to fulfill our duty ought first to live on as little as we can, and secondly, to do all the wholesome work for it we can, and to spend all we can spare in doing all the sure good we can. And sure good is, first, in feeding people, then in dressing people, then in lodging people, and lastly, in rightly pleasing people with arts or sciences or any other subject of thought. So thoughts on that section, and again, the evolution in his ideas that are happening here, or the progression in his ideas. Gabriel.
Yeah, I'm just noting that that whole discussion of station in life, the notion of one's position in the world, he goes into that in great detail. It's a wonderful section in King's Treasuries, right at the beginning of King's Treasuries. So there's a long section on the problem of the focus on stations in life and what that really means. The class, certainly.
Yeah. Tyson.
He seems to be taking people to task for being all talk and no show, that people are willing to say, oh, we must do something, but they're not really willing to sacrifice themselves all that much.
Yeah. No, and even thinking about British politics a little bit, and voting, and where we now are in terms of economic issues, the number of people who are only thinking about, so what's going to be good for me? And when they go to vote, they think what's going to be best for me economically, and not thinking through what might actually be the best for the greatest number of people. And
Well,
again, I just thinking that when I'm reading this section.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously just happened here in America.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Shall we move on then? Because we've got quite a bit more to do, and I feel we should try to read through these next few sections. So 136. Who's interested in farming and feeding and those kind of issues and would like to read this section for us? Or who hasn't read yet and would like a turn?
I'm happy to give it a shot.
Okay, Tyson, please.
I haven't yet, and yeah, okay. All of 136?
Yeah, it's not very long, so.
I say first in feeding, and once for all, do not let yourselves be deceived by any of the common talk of indiscriminate charity. The order to us is not to feed the deserving hungry, nor the industrious hungry, nor the amiable and well-intentioned hungry, but simply to feed the hungry. It is quite true, infallibly true, that if any man will not work, neither should he eat. Think of that, and every time you sit down to your dinner, ladies and gentlemen, say solemnly before you ask a blessing, how much work have I done today for my dinner? But the proper way to enforce that order on those below you, as well as on yourselves, is not to leave vagabonds and honest people to starve together, but very distinctly to discern and seize your vagabond and shut your vagabond up out of honest people's way, and very sternly then see that until he has worked, he does not eat. But the first thing is to be sure you have the food to give, and therefore to enforce the organization of vast activities in agriculture and in commerce for the production of the wholesomest food and proper storing and distribution of it, so that no famine shall any more be possible among civilized beings. There's plenty of work in this business alone and at once for any number of people who like to engage in it.
Thank you.
When I first read this earlier, I was thinking about how in the 90s here in America, we changed our welfare programs to you had to work to earn welfare, or we were really against people just sitting indolently around earning welfare. This was the kind of the notion, at least. So I think we put conditions. I don't know the exact conditions we put on it, but we instituted conditions for giving people welfare, like they had to be applying for jobs or working or whatnot. So I immediately thought about that.
Is Ruskin talking about, this is a question, the lack of empathy?
I think that's part of what's running through this. And the sense that, we do all have a responsibility to feel for the people who are homeless around us, who are lacking food around us. And so the lack of empathy is running through this. Janet, did you want to add?
Well, I'm just wondering if he's adding some sarcasm here. And to me, I read it as he's being somewhat like, you're reading this, but the way he's putting it to me seems a little sarcastic, and that helps drive the point, or at least that's the way I'm reading it.
Yeah. And that very first sentence where he says, do not let yourselves be deceived by any of the common talk of indiscriminate charity. And it sort of sets the element of, don't be deceived by those who are saying that we are giving out too much charity, we're being indiscriminate. And that notion of the deserving and undeserving poor, which were being talked about quite a bit in the Victorian period as well. Still talked about today, for that matter, as Tyson was just mentioning. Is there anything else that anybody wants to particularly draw in there?
Well, isn't he also saying that people who are homeless or hungry should actually? I'm not quite sure if he's being sarcastic about this, whether he's saying that they should work for their food, or if he's saying it doesn't matter, we need to feed them regardless. Seems to be saying two different things here.
I think he's saying both, to be honest.
Okay.
That might take us back to the Ruskin who quite likes to slightly contradict himself, but he is very clearly saying that the message is simply feed the hungry, feed them, and that's it. But he then begins to talk about, and I think this is aiming at those who feel, but of course they should have to work for their food. Well, he then says the labor required to make sure that we have enough food and fairly distribute the food and so on, that in and of itself should give rise to enough jobs to keep people employed.
Mm-hmm.
Gabriel.
And then, of course, he's asking, well, do you work enough for your food? What about you? Did you earn your supper?
Yeah. And again, this is the Ruskin. Again, I was teaching Ruskin this week to my students, and we were talking a fair bit about sort of Manchester and responses to Manchester from Ruskin, Carlyle, Engels, and that notion of the wealthy and the unwealthy, and the division of labor taken away from the people who are actually doing all the work. And there's elements of that running through this.
Definitely discrimination towards the poor.
Yeah. So shall we move on to the next section, 137? Again, fairly short. Anybody willing to read that one? Janet, please.
Secondly, dressing people. That is to say, urging everyone within reach of your influence to be always neat and clean, and giving them the means of being so. Insofar as they absolutely refuse, you must give up the effort with respect to them, only taking care that no children within your sphere of influence shall any more be brought up with such habits, and that every person who is willing to dress with propriety shall have encouragement to do so. And that first absolutely necessary step towards this is the gradual adoption of a consistent dress for different ranks of persons, so that their ranks shall be known by their dress, and that the restriction of the changes of fashion within certain limits. All which appears for the present quite impossible, but it is only so far even difficult as it is difficult to conquer our vanity, frivolity, and desire to appear what we are not. And it is not, nor shall ever be, creed of mine that these mean and shallow vices are unconquerable by Christian women. Ooh.
I wanted us to read through this whole section because it's one of the ones from Ruskin that I find a little bit it doesn't necessarily mesh easily with where my mind tends to rest. And I'm curious what others make of it. So what do we think of this section? What's striking?
Well, I'll just say, even though since I have the open floor here, that I think it's wonderful in so many ways, because I know that even when you don't have a lot of money, I'm thinking of myself when I was younger, we had to wear a power suit to work. And so that was like sort of a facade. I didn't have the money to afford the power suit. I wore the power suit. I bought the power suit with the little meager money that I had when I was just getting started, all in order to try to fit in and try to change my rank, which was just a facade, because no one would really know that, the undergarments beneath it, maybe they were ancient because I couldn't afford them, but I had to have the power suit. So I really see how, dress is a facade.
Yeah. Randy.
Yes, it strikes me a little bit of a caste system. And I think that I don't agree particularly with a lot of the caste system where everybody has to wear a certain type of uniform so everybody knows what their station is. So I'm a little bothered by it. And I think it also is connected to tribalism, which I think is a big problem that we haven't talked about with Ruskin. But I'm pretty new to this group, and I don't want to open a can of worms. So that's all my thinking.
I mean, that is getting to the heart of what I find a bit problematic here as well. Is that it does speak of class and of sort of capturing people into their allotted spaces in life. And that is one of the things that I find more problematic with Ruskin across his works, although he's so wonderful on an individual perspective with people of other classes, and he is clearly trying to make lives better. He is very hierarchical. And for an East Coast Canadian that comes from a very flat social structure where hierarchies don't really exist, I find those aspects of Ruskin and some of those aspects of the British culture I now live in really quite difficult to get my head and heart around. Gabriel.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. I think Ruskin has a certain sense of hierarchy and of the suitability, the justness of hierarchies in society. I think we also have to note that this was a very, very big thing in the Victorian period. I mean, maids had certain clothing that they wore in the home, and when they went out to shop, do the week's shopping, they dressed a different way, but a way which made it clear that they were a domestic servant. So in the Victorian period, very detailed sense of the hierarchy of clothing. I do think that there's one point here where it connects with his notion of station in life, which is what I think he's talking about is that idea of using of proclaiming that one is a certain class or has accomplished certain things in life simply by dressing the part.
Yeah.
And that's a false consciousness.
Yeah.
So I think that's certainly here in its connection with his earlier discussion of what it means, what the stations in life are all about, and what it means to get on in life and so forth.
And I think to your last point there, Gabe, I think that also inverts, because we read this and I read it and I hear about putting poor people in their place. But I think this connects with other places where he tries to put rich people in their place too. Right. The wealthy people dress a certain way, even though they've accomplished very little on their own, per se. So I think there's that too. But that requires additional context, I think, than what is just right here. That requires reading into this, I think, from other places. But I think that in other works, I think he's trying to play with that idea.
Mm-hmm.
And he does, again, at the very beginning of this section, set out the idea that we need to give others the means to actually be well-clothed and to be clean. And it's part of what he talks about in the preface to Sesame and Lilies that he published when he added this lecture in as well, where he does talk a bit about the requirement to help others. Do it.
Well, for Ruskin, the aesthetic is also the spiritual.
Yeah.
And clothing is, while it is in some sense trivial to the philosophical inquiries that Ruskin leads us on, it is still part of the extrinsic reality of who we are and who we appear to be to one another. In fact, it occurred to me many decades ago that we pay very little attention analytically to the importance of physical beauty in our species. These folks rise, they become superstars of one kind and another, actors, singers, models, and so on. But I've not found much discourse about the importance and the dangers of this reliance on the extrinsic, and it's part of our challenge as thinking creatures to both overcome and embrace the reality of it. Ruskin here, I think, is embracing a reality, and for him, as I say, the aesthetic and the spiritual are twinned.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right that we only have about 10 minutes left?
That's right.
Okay, so let's very quickly move on we're going to skip lodging, but we'll be aware that lodging people is very important. So skip 138 and also skip 139, where he sets out that these three things are the requirements for a civilized life, and then builds through to the notion of the importance of arts and joy, for lack of a better way to put it. And that takes us to 140. And I think we should try to read through 140, even if we don't have much time to actually discuss it. Who would like to read us? Actually, we do 140 through to the words beneficent peace, which is just above so with our youths. So somebody willing to take us through that first chunk of it? Let's do it.
Sure, I'd love to. I love reading Ruskin aloud to myself, by the way. But much more than this, on such holy and simple practice will be founded indeed at last an infallible religion. The greatest of all the mysteries of life, and the most terrible, is the corruption of even the sincerest religion, which is not daily founded on rational, effective, humble, and helpful action. Helpful action, observe, for there is just one law, which, obeyed, keeps all religions pure. Forgotten makes them all false. Whenever in any religious faith, dark or bright, we allow our minds to dwell upon the points in which we differ from other people, we are wrong and in the devil's power. That is the essence of the Pharisees' thanksgiving. Lord, I thank thee that I am not as other men are. At every moment of our lives, we should be trying to find out not in what we differ from other people, but in what we agree with them. And the moment we find we can agree as to anything that should be done, kind or good, and who but fools could not, then do it. Push at it together. You can't quarrel in a side-by-side push, but the moment that even the best men stop pushing and begin talking, they mistake their pugnacity for piety, and it's all over. I will not speak of the crimes which in past times have been committed in the name of Christ, nor of the follies which are at this hour held to be consistent with obedience to him, but I will speak of the morbid corruption and waste of vital power in religious sentiment by by which the pure strength of that which should be the guiding soul of every nation, the splendor of its youthful manhood, and spotless light of its maidenhood is averted or cast away. You may see continually girls who have never been taught to do a single useful thing thoroughly, who cannot sew, who cannot cook, who cannot cast an account, nor prepare a medicine, whose whole life has been passed either in play or in pride. You will find girls like these, when they are earnest-hearted, cast all their innate passion of religious spirit, which was meant by God to support them through the irksomeness of daily toil, into grievous and vain meditation over the meaning of the great book, of which no syllable was ever yet to be understood but through a deed. All the instinctive wisdom and mercy of their womanhood made vain, and the glory of their pure consciences warped into fruitless agony concerning questions which the laws of common, serviceable life would either have solved for them in an instant or kept out of their way. Give such a girl any true work that will make her active in the dawn and weary at night, with the consciousness that her fellow creatures have indeed been the better for her day, and the powerless sorrow of her enthusiasm will transform itself into a majesty of radiant and beneficent peace.
Thank you. So let's pause there briefly, give ourselves a maximum of 3 minutes to talk about it, and then move on to the next section. So what do we want to raise about this first half?
Action is everything.
Yeah.
Enlightened action.
Yeah. I sort of found myself thinking deeds, not words, which is a slightly different late Victorian concept, but again, that running through.
It's very Old Testament as well.
Yeah.
I think,
Gabriel, did you want to?
even significant in the sense that you can't understand in this case the text of the Bible except through deeds.
Yeah.
Through your own deeds and your own experience.
Yeah. Brandy, is your hand still up from before, or is that a new? Okay. Yeah, and again, that notion of helpful action, deeds is everything. Okay, I think we've summed that up. We could do so much more, but let's keep going to the final push. Gabriel, you've not read yet today, have you?
No.
Would you like to take us through to the end?
Sure. So with our youths, we once taught them to make Latin verses and called them educated. Now we teach them to leap and to row, to hit a ball with a bat, and call them educated. Can they plow? Can they sow? Can they plant at the right time or build with a steady hand? Is it the effort of their lives to be chaste, knightly, faithful, holy in thought, lovely in word and deed? Indeed it is, with some, nay, with many, and the strength of England is in them, and the hope. But we have to turn their courage from the toil of war to the toil of mercy, and their intellect from the discipline of words to discernment of things, and their knighthood from the errantry of adventure to the state and fidelity of a kingly power. And then indeed shall abide for them and for us an incorruptible felicity and an infallible religion. Shall abide for us faith, no more to be assailed by temptation, no more to be defended by wrath and by fear. Shall abide with us hope, no more to be quenched by the years that overwhelm or made ashamed by the shadows that betray. Shall abide for us and with us the greatest of these, the abiding will, the abiding name of our Father, for the greatest of these is charity.
Thank you. So as we sort of bring this to a close and think about this final section, but within its whole context, what's coming to mind? What would we like to talk about? Zachary.
Yeah, I just sort of taking this reading as a whole. I think, and Ruskin doesn't get at it as directly as I think I want him to in this, but he's ultimately talking about how to live an artful life, and part of coming back to this idea of crisis that he's very explicit about throughout, living as minimally as one can while doing the most actionable kind of work. He sees this as a way of pointing us towards living an artful life, which is a life, now by inference, of creation, practicality, and also community, as we saw in that last passage, right, about seeing what we have in common and pushing at it, whatever it happens to be. Which in a way, coming back to that question of what is possible, you don't know until you start pushing together. And so I think for me, that ties a lot of these ideas together.
Well, he's manifesting the golden rule really everywhere. Kindness is everything, and a kind of understanding of love for life itself, for everything in life. And I have to just now say this, that quantum mechanics, quantum physics is bringing us back to the notion that vitality inheres in the pebbles that Ruskin so likes to paint. Vitality, actual life, the actual energy fields that quantum physics has discovered, has revealed, is a revelation that can be thought of very, very philosophically and very much in the context of Ruskin, I think.
Gabriel.
Well, and then this connects so deeply with what he writes in Modern Painters 5 about the law of help. That all of created reality, all of art itself, all of created reality, human society is all a codependent whole of cooperation, of cooperating communities to build something together. So this is so deeply really at the heart of the of the of the coherence in Ruskin. Ruskin is all over the map. He has so many aspects to him, but this is the coherent strain, is this notion that everything is connected, everything is responsible.
I have to pick up, Gabe, that quantum brings us the term entanglement.
Mm.
Okay? It is really central to what you've just said.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself thinking about just at the end of Praeterita, where he's talking about the fireflies, and he says how things bind and blend themselves together. And again, that notion of everything, not just memory, which is part of what he's talking about, but everything is intertwined. Bernard, you unmuted. Did you want to say something?
Oh no,
Okay.
let's see. That was an accident on my part. My apologies.
Okay. Any final words? We're at time. There's so much more we could have talked about in terms of this. One of the things we skipped entirely was a dream segment back, where was that?
117.
117. Yeah. And so I'd urge you to read that. It's a really interesting sort of dream parable that we could have spent a while talking about as well.
I will say, however, one more thing. This bears at least one more discussion. For and may I suggest that at a later time that we have that wrapping up discussion.
And pulling in some of the bits we skipped along the way.
Yes.
And maybe even alongside it, say the preface that came out with it or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, shall we end on that note of thinking forward to a future possibility of meeting again to go a little bit more in depth and yeah, thank you everyone. It's just been really lovely as the sort of thoughts build on each other and dialogue back and forth. And I think really helps all of us to better understand what Ruskin's saying in these passages.
Thank
As
you
with
so very
Ruskin,
much.
there's always more.
Yeah.
And finally, at least on my part, I would like to thank Professor Dickinson for her able presentation of all this information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Indeed.
Yes, indeed. Wonderful.
Such a
Yes.
delight to have you leading us.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was just very enriching. It's just wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Just a quick housekeeping point about other activities. We Wednesday, November 20th, we have the honor of being invited by the Fogg Museum at Harvard to a lecture by Marjorie Cohn on Ruskin and the Charles Eliot Norton Circle. That whole group of arts educators, principally, who were so influenced by Ruskin, by the elements of drawing and the elements of perspective, and the friendship, the deep friendship between Norton and Ruskin. So that's Wednesday, November 20th at 9:30 to 10:30. Lecture by Marjorie Cohn should be really very, very significant. You can find the information and the links to register for that lecture on our website at www.ruskinartclub.org. Also would mention that last week's study session is already posted on our website. So on the YouTube channel, you'll find the last week's study session, and this one will be up very shortly. So thank you all. Thank you all for coming. This was terrific. And there will be more study sessions next year. We usually do 10 to 12 study sessions a year. We might even be trying to do more next year. So just keep checking with our website. I'd like to thank Katrina for her technical help today. And we'll see you all next time.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody. Thanks so much. It was great.